Right Network. Mobilizing, countering the left, energizing the right. New Right Network, home of the New Right movement.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to New Right Network's original series, SmythTV. Your host, Brian Smith, giving you all the breaking news of the day, wrapping it all up, making sense of it, exposing the fake news media, the lies, the propaganda from the left, and giving you the real news, folks, every single night, Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And today is a special day. Not only that it's my birthday, but we're doing something special today for the first day of summer, June 21st, Friday feeling. We're going to have movie night tonight, guys. It's a continuation of Conspiracy World War I. This will be Conspiracy World War I Part 2. Very, very interesting how things are leading up and what the English did, what London did to drag America into the war. Yeah, folks, the stories, names have changed, story sounds a little bit different, but it's all the same. We're still fighting the deep state. We're still fighting the dark side, and we're exposing that right here on SmythTV every single night. And folks, if you, just an announcement, if you're a writer, if you want to be a writer, if you are a journalist and want to get involved, go over to newrightnetwork.com, get involved, hit the link down in the description below and get involved. They're looking for new writers and editors, so jump on in. The water's warm, folks. And if this is the first time been on the show, welcome, welcome, welcome. What we do is we showcase patriots and great people on Twitter, their handles, their tweets, as well as Donald Trump's tweets, which we have a handful of them today. Thank you, sir, for tweeting out. You're actually talking to the people on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis, and we absolutely love it, folks. So we showcase every single person, and if you go down in the description, it says full show notes. Click on that link, and that link will take you over to newrightnetwork.com, where the embed for the video for the show is in the show notes. So you can share that link with your friends and your family, so they can watch the show, and then they can see the show notes right down there below. And in the notes, you'll click on the different names. That'll take you right over to Twitter, so you know who to follow. And a lot of these MAGA folks, they will follow you back. A lot of them say follow back. And if you look at the number of people they're following versus the people that are following them, if the numbers are quite even, that means that they're really taking care of their account, and they will follow you back. It's a great way to help build your following on Twitter and staying plugged in with these folks and making comments back and forth, and people get to notice who you are. And so we got a couple of things that we're going to talk about today before we get to the movie. It's fantastic. It's only 35 minutes long, but it's a documentary of what had transpired and those that conspired together to actually create World War I, to make that happen. And then once that had started, they realized that we got a communist president over in America. And how do we get America in this? We need to get a hold of that communist, because I know we can get him to jump in, even during his re-election run, folks, and we'll get into all that stuff, but it's going to be phenomenal. So the things we're going to talk about here real quick, we'll talk about some of the Trump news, a lot of Trump news, some great information, things to feel good about in the direction of our country under this incredible president, as well as the hot button topic. As of yesterday, I talked about it, the Iran story and shooting down 2 drones, each worth $130 million apiece. Tensions getting hot, and you got Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, the awful Muslim Democrats that are taunting this president. Elected officials taunting this president over high tensions with Iran and the Muslim leaders there. Folks, this is by design. They are conspiring together. This is on purpose. They're being tapped. They're being triggered by the people that are pulling the strings. Hey, it's your time. Do this, do this, do this now. Folks, this is not good. We've seen this story. We've seen it before, and we're seeing it play out. And the movie we get to here in a few minutes, you're going to notice these deep staters, these dark individuals, the ones that live in the dark side, if you will, that are okay with murdering millions and millions of people just so that they can gain power and money. This is what we continue to fight. We've been fighting this since 1776, folks. It's no different to this day. World War I, it came. We had to fight it. I mean, when I say we, I mean you and me as patriots, now woke, with technology at our fingertips, people doing incredible documentaries, and people like Tom Fitton sinking out documents through Freedom of Information Act, documents obtaining from different governments, WikiLeaks fighting the good cause. Thank you, folks, for doing everything that you do. And then we bring it right here to you on the show, folks, so that we can expose and you can then get this out to your friends and your family. We do a whole wrap up of a bunch of people doing a lot of stuff all at the same time. And if you got ADD, that's cool. So do I. We kind of hit it pretty hard back to back to back. And let's jump into it, and we'll get into Donald Trump news real quick. This tweeted out by President Donald Trump at Real Donald Trump. Since Election Day 2016, stocks up almost 50%. Stocks gained $9.2 trillion in value, and more than 5 million new jobs added to the economy. At Lou Dobbs, if our opponent had won, there would have been a market crash, plain and simple. And then he tags Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham in that. He tweeted this out yesterday morning. S&P opens at record high. This was 7 o'clock in the morning. And then later on in the afternoon, he retweets out S&P closes at record high. This is absolutely incredible. Thank you, sir. Nobody's talking about the great news that this administration is having an effect on the economy, deregulation, lower taxes. And again, I've been talking about this all week long. Donald Trump putting into play a new insurance bill for employers and employees, and these small businesses with 100 employees or less are now going to be able to benefit from the incredible moves that this president is making. Thank you, sir, very much. And one thing that I think is phenomenal, because I've gone from job to job, it is such an awful pain in the butt to either move from one job to another, or if your company changes policies from one year to the next, you got to go out and find another doctor. You got to go out and do the legwork. It really is a hassle, especially if you have to do that on a regular basis. New rules are going to allow you to take your insurance from one company to another company and keep your doctor. What? If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. What? That was Obama. No, that was Donald Trump. That's not Obama. That's Donald Trump. If you like your doctor, you now can keep your doctor. Phenomenal, sir. Thank you so much for doing everything that you do to make America better. And I don't know if you heard about this breaking news, guys, but this is huge. This is big beyond big. We have a bunch of states now banding together to ban abortion, period, to stop partial birth abortion, to stop abortion at the day of birth, to stop abortion 100%. And now we have breaking news. Court rules President Trump can defund Planned Parenthood. This will cut almost $60 million in taxpayer funds. This by lifenews.com. A 3-judge panel said the administration will likely prevail in the legal battle over Title X family planning program, since similar Reagan-era rules were upheld by the Supreme Court almost 30 years ago. Absent a stay, HHS will be forced to allow taxpayer dollars to be spent in a manner that it has concluded violates the law, as well as the government's important policy interest in ensuring that taxpayer dollars do not go to fund or subsidize abortions, wrote the judges, all appointees of previous Republican presidents in a 3-0 opinion. Guys, this is huge. We're making big strides and moving forward. I know some states they're not outlawing abortion 100%, but at least we're getting to that point and we're turning the curve. Any ban on abortion is a good step and a good measure. Not like Governor Northam out there in Virginia. He said that, once the baby is born, the doctor and the mother can then decide what's best for the baby, if it should live or die. There you go. Democrats on display. Why does he get a free pass on that? And why does he also get a free pass on wearing blackface and or the hood? That hashtag Blexit. I'm talking to you folks. I'm talking about walking away from the Democrat Party and the evils that they support and the evils that they continue to push. And as we continue to fight the deep state, and as Donald Trump continues to fight all the forces that are coming at him, the globalists, the ones that do not want to lose power, we've got individuals working for the government, trying to help Donald Trump. And remember here this week, Governor Cuomo signed into law illegals can get driver's licenses. And we know in California, once you go to get a driver's license, they can sign you up to vote. Here in Ohio, I was standing right next to a lady, and as she was renewing her driver's license, the lady across the counter asked her if she was registered to vote and if she would like to register now. This is the problem that we're facing. And at Black Widow 1928, a great patriot to follow, upstate New York clerks refuse to grant illegal aliens driver's licenses. They are taking a stand against the state's controversial new law granting driver's license to illegals despite legislation signed by New York Governor Cuomo. This at the New York Post. Just like the lady down there in Kentucky that refused to give marriage licenses to a man and a man or woman and woman, gay couples. I'm all in agreement, folks. If you want to get together and have a civil union, which is what you had, fair enough. Good to go. Piece of paper, sign on a dotted line. I came up with a word for you. It's called garage. We have marriage. You guys have garage. You cannot redefine a word. You just cannot redefine it, because once you redefine that word, liberals, then you change law, you change legislation, you change contracts. Things are changed when you change definitions of words. And the Supreme Court ruling that marriage does apply to a man and a woman and a woman is absolutely wrong, because one, they redefined a word, and two, they legislated from the bench. And this at Ferry Q15, speaking about illegals and Democrats not helping, a helping hand from the Mexican Airlines to send migrants back to their own countries for $1. This news18.com. Donald Trump is correct. Mexico and now a Mexican Airlines doing more to help America and illegal immigrants than the entire Democrat Party in total. How amazing. Thank you so much. And as we turn the corner and get into the conspirators and who is conspiring against the American people, that's the way it's been going for the last 100 years, as we're starting to see all these things unfold, documents coming out, WikiLeaks spilling things, Freedom of Information Act. Now we have presidents and government officials and new government officials in different countries around the world willing to work with Donald Trump, willing to work with the people, like in Ukraine, the new president in Italy. Folks, I'm telling you, we're turning the corner, and technology being what it is, we are living in an incredible day and age where information is just so abundant that we can expose these deep state conspirators. And now we have the big thing that's really flaring up, no pun intended, Iran. Back in 1979, it was the overthrow of the Shah. Thank you, Jimmy Carter, and the installation of the Ayatollah Khomeini. I've shown you guys many pictures of what women what women look like. You can look at them back prior to 1979, folks. Westernized clothes, bell bottoms, high heels, bikinis, two-piece bikinis, all just beautiful women. Now, no, man, ain't legal. You're under Sharia law. See, this is the problem. And just as the problem with Venezuela falling apart, and we can put that on display, socialism, reckon it, communism, reckon it, and Islam, reckon it. All three of them, same thing, obtaining one goal: to enslave the citizenry. And we have Donald Trump tweeting out once again, President Obama made a desperate and terrible deal with Iran, gave them $150 billion in cash, plus $1.8 billion in cash. Iran was a big trouble, and he bailed them out, gave them a free path to nuclear weapons, and soon. Instead of saying thank you, Iran yelled, "Death to America." I terminated the deal, which was not even ratified by Congress, and imposed strong sanctions. They are a much weakened nation today than at the beginning of my presidency, when they were causing major problems throughout the Middle East. Now they are bust. On Monday, they shot down an unmanned drone flying in international waters. We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites when I asked, how many will die? 150, sir, was the answer from a general. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it. Not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. I am in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new and ready to go. By far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting and more added last night. Iran can never have nuclear weapons, not against the U.S. and not against the people of the world. You're never going to see a president like this ever again. In your lifetime, your kids' lifetime, your children's lifetime, your grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren's lifetime, never again. The rockets that we were going to launch, possibly, collateral damage of 150 people. No, not worth one drone. Not worth $130 million. I agree, sir. 100% I agree. Thank you, Donald Trump, for making that leadership and that wise decision at the last moment. Folks, retaliating like this is what they want. Retaliating like this is what Omar wants, what Ilhan wants, AOC. The Democrats want Donald Trump to get into a war. They desperately need to wreck his presidency. The economy's booming. People are happy. His base is stuck to him like super glue and not going anywhere. Things are getting better in America. To go to war could wreck all that. To go to war would cause all kinds of problems and tensions. And a lot of people down the middle of the road, they don't like going to war. I don't like going to war either. I don't think we should be in a lot of these different wars. Pull these people out of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Syria. Get our troops out of those places. Find a hangout in Germany. Find a hangout and protect Italy. No big deal. But in the Middle East, we shouldn't be there. And now, by the grace of God, thank you, good Lord above, Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for blessing Donald Trump and guiding him with supernatural wisdom. Leaders around the world, Christian leaders specifically around the world, have been praying day and night for Donald Trump and the correct decisions. I'll tell you what, this is probably the biggest one that he's made yet. And I'm just really, really happy about it. And this at DG Perzer, Chuck Schumer, Red Arrow, is the bumbling fool cheering after meeting with president and later commenting he was worried the administration may bumble into war. He and Nancy Pelosi are bottom feeders, caring more about their power than any soldier, sailor, Marine, or USA. Making this large screen and letting it play over and over, folks, that's Chuck Schumer right there, throwing his hands in the air like he just won something. And there's Nancy Pelosi in yellow, clapping her hands as if they both had won something. Conspirators. You want to know who the conspirators are? Right here. They're conspiring against the American public, the American people, the will of the people. The Democrats are the conspirators. Obama, conspirator. Joe Biden, conspirator. All of these Democrats conspiring to maintain their power and control over people. And now that AOC, Ilhan, and Rashida Tlaib have now tasted that power, tasted that money, they're piling on as if they've been in Congress for decades. It's going to be a real sad night when they realize quickly that their 2 years is up and they're not coming back. Here's Obama's conspiracy and the FBI, the conspirators in the FBI. This at Jay Solomon reports, breaking, Representative Mark Meadows preparing referral, asking IG to investigate FBI and Mueller's handling of Manafort's warrant. This over at thehill.com. Ukraine's top anti-corruption prosecutor, Nazar, told John Solomon that he warned the U.S. State Department, law enforcement liaison, and multiple FBI agents in the summer of 2016 that the Ukrainian authorities who recovered the ledger believed it to be a fraud. Paul Manafort should be let loose. Now we're starting to find out that the black cash ledger used to take down Paul Manafort by the corrupt Ukrainian government, who is no longer there, and now they're starting to clean up their corruption because they were doing ties with Vladimir Putin and the Russians, and on audio tape saying that they are going to help Hillary Clinton win, and this is how we're going to do it with the black cash ledger. Now we're starting to find out, and now Mark Meadows is getting involved. Thank you, sir, for pushing this information through, because the FBI would not use the audio or the documents or the other officials saying that this was fake, and they're now saying it's as fake as the PP dossier, Christopher Steele, Russiagate. And so what's going on in Iran? What really is happening over there? We've got a friend over there, right, who lives in Iran. His name's Hanif. I haven't heard from him in a long time, and I've kept messaging on Twitter and DMing him, just fearing that, maybe internet connection cut, maybe, whatever. I have no idea. And today he messaged me and told me about what's going on June 21st, Friday in Iran. Praying for these folks in Iran, people, absolutely. And if you want to stay posted and abreast on what's going on in Iran, I absolutely implore you to follow Hanif. And he tweets out, Iranian Americans will join hashtag March for Regime Change by Irans on Friday outside the State Department to say Iran's people are fed up with the terrorist regime and support the protest for a free Iran. And he tags Donald Trump, Secretary Pompeo, Nikki Haley, John Bolton, press secretary. Man, I just praying for these folks over there. I've been watching documentaries and cameras on the ground. See, before we didn't know about what was really going on in Iran since in 79, all the way up until the advent of the cell phone, and everybody's got a camera now. So now the cameras, the internet, everything is exposing, and talk about sunlight as a disinfectant. Just put the light on it and show it. And now we see the protest. We see Iran's regime firing live bullets, killing protesters who no guns. Maybe rock, maybe stick, but no guns. And it's just absolutely horrid. They'll arrest protesters, stick them in prisons, and let them rot to die. This is what Islam does under Sharia law. And more breaking news at Tom Fitton exposing the conspirators. Big arms scandals, smoking gun docs uncovered by Judicial Watch show Obama, Clinton were absolutely aware of the arms going to Syria through Benghazi and were warned about the rise of ISIS, and they were supporting terrorists in Syria. Obama, Clinton created the Syrian-Iran mess. It's the heavy lifting right here. Thank you so much, Judicial Watch. Folks, go down in the description below, click the link, check out the video. It's about 8 minutes long, a lot of detailed information, and Tom Fitton doing a phenomenal job. We are exposing the conspirators here, right here. New Right Network's original series, SmythTV, giving you the breaking news, wrapping it up, making sense of it, exposing the fake news, exposing those who conspire against Americans, and giving you the real news, and giving you the ones that want to conspire with America. Yes, that's right. Donald Trump, Tom Fitton, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, all these people are conspiring with us, the Americans, to root out the evil and make America great again. I'm telling you, folks, what an incredible time to be alive and to keep pushing forward. Folks, if you like what you hear on the show and you enjoy this show, jump down in the description below, jump over to SmythTV, become a Patreon of ours, and a special gift if you do, and when you become a Patreon of ours, that you receive the show notes and the show video, everything, 3 hours earlier than everybody else, so you'll know exactly what's going on. You'll get to see the insight of the show. You can actually watch it right there, or you could just go through the show notes and get ready to watch it when it goes live at 7 p.m. Eastern, where I'll be on. We text back and forth. We have comments and conversation. So become a Patreon or jump over to PayPal if you prefer PayPal, or Cash Me. Help support the new news media. I do all of this on my own dime, folks. No sponsors, nobody paying me. It's just you great Patreons helping to get out this great news every single day. And I'm blessed by good Lord above to continue to do this every single night. And right after the show, another incredible patriot, Wayne Dupree, and a good friend of mine. Just jump down on the link in the show notes below and click it, and it'll take you right over to Wayne Dupree right after the show is over. And without any further ado, folks, let's jump into our incredible movie, Conspiracy World War I, Part 2, the next chapter, the American Front, and the sinking of the Lusitania, the killing of 1,198 passengers and crew. Only 128 Americans were on board, folks. 128 Americans. But that cruiser was armed merchant and listed by the London as a warship. And in 2019, 99 years later, government documents have surfaced and have confirmed that she was carrying millions and millions of munitions, and Germany had all the right to shoot that down. For 128 Americans, and I'm sorry, folks, for 128 Americans, we turned into a war machine to kill 9 million dead soldiers and 7 million civilians.
Previously, on the World War I conspiracy. The First World War started as the result of a conspiracy. But to understand this conspiracy, we must turn not to Sarajevo and the conclave of Serbian nationalists plotting the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the summer of 1914, but to a chilly drawing room in London in the winter of 1891.
Rhodes had the money and he had the contact. He was a great Rothschild man, and his mining wealth was literally uncountable.
The will contains the goal, and then by the time he dies in 1902, there's funding, there's a plan, there's an agenda, there's working groups.
The only thing feasible to carry out this idea is a secret society gradually absorbing the wealth of the world.
And they thought if they could hook in with that alliance, then they had the possibility of defeating Germany quickly and without too much trouble. And that is basically what they did.
It is to this clique, not to the doings of any conspiracy in Sarajevo, that we can attribute the real origins of the First World War, with the 9 million dead soldiers and 7 million dead civilians that lay piled in its wake. But for this cabal, 1914 was just the start of the story. In keeping with their ultimate vision of a united Anglo-American world order, the jewel in the crown of the Milner Group was to embroil the United States in the war, to unite Britain and America in their conquest of the German foe. Across the Atlantic, the next chapter in this hidden history was just getting underway. And now, part 2 of the World War I conspiracy. Part 2. The American Front. May 7th, 1915. Colonel Edward Mandell House is on his way to meet with King George V, who ascended to the throne after Edward VII's death in 1910. Accompanying him is Edward Grey, British Foreign Secretary and acolyte of the Milner Group. The two speak of the probability of an ocean liner being sunk, and House informs Grey that, if this were done, a flame of indignation would sweep across America, which would in itself probably carry us into the war. An hour later, at Buckingham Palace, King George V inquires about an even more specific event. We fell to talking, strangely enough, of the probability of Germany sinking a transatlantic liner. He said, suppose they should sink the Lusitania with American passengers on board. And, by a remarkable coincidence, at 2 o'clock that afternoon, just hours after these conversations took place, that is precisely what happened. The Lusitania, one of the largest passenger liners in the world, is en route from New York to Liverpool when it is struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat. She sinks to the bottom in minutes, killing 1,198 passengers and crew, including 128 Americans. The disaster, portrayed as a brazen, unexpected attack on an innocent passenger liner, helps to shift public opinion about the war in the US. To the average American, the war suddenly doesn't feel like a strictly European concern. Every aspect of the story was, as we now know, a deception. The Lusitania was not an innocent passenger liner, but an armed merchant cruiser officially listed by the British Admiralty as an auxiliary warship. It was outfitted with extra armor, designed to carry 12 6-inch guns, and equipped with shell racks for holding ammunition. On its transatlantic voyage, the ship was carrying war material, specifically more than 4 million .303 rifle bullets and tons of munitions including shells, powder, fuses, and gun cotton in unrefrigerated cargo holds that were dubiously marked cheese, butter, and oysters. This secret manifest was officially denied by the British government for generation after generation, but in 2014, a full 99 years after the event, internal government documents were finally released in which the government admitted the deception. And, most remarkably of all, by Edward Mandell House's own account, both Edward Grey and King George V himself were discussing the sinking of the Lusitania just hours before the event took place. It's a story that provides a window into the secret society's years-long campaign to draw the United States into World War I. But in order to understand this story, we have to meet Edward Mandell House and the other Milner Group co-conspirators in America. Strange as it might seem, there were no shortage of such co-conspirators in the US. Some, like the members of the influential Pilgrim Society, founded in 1902 for the encouragement of Anglo-American good fellowship, shared Rhodes's vision of a united Anglo-American world empire. Others were simply lured by the promise of money. But whatever their motivation, those sympathetic to the cause of the Round Table included some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the United States at the time. Many of these figures were to be found at the heart of Wall Street, in the banking and financial institutions revolving around J.P. Morgan and Company. John Pierpont Morgan, or Pierpont as he preferred to be called, was the nucleus of turn-of-the-century America's banking sector. Getting his start in London in 1857 at his father's merchant banking firm, the young Pierpont returned to New York in 1858 and embarked on one of the most remarkable careers in the history of the world. Making his money financing the American robber barons of the late 19th century, from Vanderbilt's railroads to Adolph Simon Ox's purchase of the New York Times to the buyout of Carnegie Steel, Morgan amassed a financial empire that, by the 1890s, wielded more power than the United States Treasury itself. He teamed up with his close allies, the House of Rothschild, to bail out the U.S. government during a gold shortage in 1895 and ease the Panic of 1907, which he helped to precipitate by locking 120 of the country's most prestigious bankers in his library and forcing them to reach a deal on a $25 million loan to keep the banking system afloat. As we saw in Century of Enslavement, the history of the Federal Reserve, Morgan and his associates were only too happy to use the banking crises they helped to create to galvanize public opinion toward the creation of a central bank. So long as that central bank was owned and directed by Wall Street, of course. But their initial plan, the Aldrich Plan, was immediately recognized as a Wall Street ploy. Morgan and his fellow bankers were going to have to find a suitable cover to get their act through Congress, including, preferably, a president with sufficient progressive cover to give the new Federal Reserve Act an air of legitimacy. And they found their ideal candidate in the politically unknown president of Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson, a man who they were about to rocket straight into the White House with the help of their point man and Round Table co-conspirator, Edward Mandell House. The election of Woodrow Wilson once again shows how power operates behind the scenes to subvert the popular vote and the will of the public. Knowing that the stuffy and politically unknown Wilson would have little chance of being elected over the more popular and affable William Howard Taft, Morgan and his banking allies bankrolled Teddy Roosevelt on a third-party ticket to split the Republican vote. The strategy worked, and the banker's real choice, Woodrow Wilson, came to power with just 42% of the popular vote. With Wilson in office and Colonel House directing his actions, Morgan and his conspirators got their wish. 1913 saw the passage of both the Federal Income Tax and the Federal Reserve Act, thus consolidating Wall Street's control over the economy. World War I, brewing in Europe just 8 months after the creation of the Federal Reserve, was to be the first full test of that power. But difficult as it had been for the Round Table to coax the British Empire out of its splendid isolation from the continent and into the web of alliances that precipitated the war, it would be that much harder for their American fellow travelers to coax the United States out of its own isolationist stance. Although the Spanish-American War had seen the advent of American imperialism, the thought of the U.S. getting involved in that European war was still far from the minds of the average American. A 1914 editorial from the New York Sun captures the sentiment of most of America at the time of the outbreak of the war in Europe.
There is nothing reasonable in such a war as that for which Europe has been making ready, and it would be folly for this country to sacrifice itself to the frenzy of dynastic policies and the clash of ancient hatreds which is urging the old world to its destruction.
The Sun was by no means unique in its assessment. A vote taken among 367 newspapers throughout the United States in November of 1914 found just 105 pro-Ally and 20 pro-German papers, with the vast majority, 242 of them, remaining firmly neutral and recommending that Uncle Sam stay out of the conflict. Once again, just as they did in Britain, the cabal was going to have to leverage its control of the press and key governmental positions to begin to shape public perception and instill pro-war sentiment. And once again, the full resources of these motivated co-conspirators were brought to bear on the task. One of the first shells in this barrage of propaganda to penetrate the American consciousness was the rape of Belgium, a catalogue of scarcely believable atrocities allegedly committed by the German forces in their invasion and occupation of Belgium at the start of the war. In a manner that was to become the norm in 20th century propaganda, the stories had a kernel of truth. There is no doubt that there were atrocities committed and civilians murdered by German forces in Belgium. But the propaganda that was spun from those kernels of truth was so over the top in its attempts to portray the Germans as inhuman brutes that it serves as a perfect example of war propaganda.
The American population at that time had a lot of German people in it. 30 to 50% of the population had relations back to Germany. So there had to be this very clever propaganda campaign. It's known today as babies on bayonets. So if you have no interest in World War I, but you think it's interesting to study propaganda so you don't get fooled again, then type it into your favorite search engine, babies on bayonets, World War I. You'll see hundreds of different posters where the Germans are bayoneting babies, and it brings about emotions, and it doesn't give you the details of anything, and emotions drive wars, not facts. Facts are left out and deleted all the time in order to create wars. So I think that putting facts back in might help prevent wars. But I do know that they like to drive people on emotion. The babies on bayonets, getting America into World War I, that's a key part of it.
Children who had their hands chopped off, nuns that were raped, shocking things, genuinely shocking things. The Canadian officer who was nailed to a St. Andrew's cross on a church door and left there to bleed to death. These were the great myths peddled in order to defame and bring down the whole image of any justification for German action and try and influence America into war.
Jerry Docherty, co-author of Hidden History, The Secret Origins of the First World War.
That's not to say that there weren't atrocities on both sides. War is an atrocious event, and there are always victims, absolutely. And I offer no justification for it. But the lies, the unnecessary abuse of propaganda, even when in Britain they decided that they would put together the definitive volume of evidence to present it to the world, the person they asked to do this just so happened to have been former British ambassador to the United States and a man called Bryce, who was very well liked in the States. And his evidence was published and put forward, and there were screeds of stories after stories.
The campaign had its intended effect. Horrified by the stories emerging from Belgium, stories picked up and amplified by the members of the Round Table in the British press, including the influential Times and the lurid Daily Mail, run by Milner ally Lord Northcliffe, American public opinion began to shift away from viewing the war as a European squabble about an assassinated Archduke, and toward viewing the war as a struggle against the evil Germans and their sins against civilization. The culmination of this propaganda campaign was the release of the report of the Committee on Alleged German Outrages, better known as the Bryce Report, compiled for His Britannic Majesty's government and presided over by Viscount James Bryce, who, not coincidentally, was the former British ambassador to America and a personal friend of Woodrow Wilson. The report was a sham, based on 1,200 depositions collected by examiners who had no authority to administer an oath. The committee, which was not allowed to speak to a single witness itself, was tasked merely with sifting through this material and deciding what should be included in the final report. Unsurprisingly, the very real atrocities that the Germans had committed in Belgium, the burning of Louvain, Andenne, and Dinant, for example, were overshadowed by the sensationalist and completely unverifiable stories of babies on bayonets and other acts of villainy. The report itself, concluding that the Germans had systematically and premeditatedly broken the rules and usages of war, was published on May 12, 1915, just 5 days after the sinking of the Lusitania. Directly between these two events, on May 9, 1915, Colonel House, the man who Wilson called his second personality and his independent self, wrote a telegram which the president dutifully read to his cabinet and was picked up by newspapers across the country.
America has come to the parting of the ways when she must determine whether she stands for civilized or uncivilized warfare. We can no longer remain neutral spectators. Our action in this crisis will determine the part we play when peace is made, and how far we may influence a settlement for the lasting good of humanity. We are being weighed in the balance, and our position amongst nations is being assessed by mankind.
But despite this all-out propaganda assault, the American public was still largely against entering the war. It was in this context that the same group of Wall Street financiers who had maneuvered Wilson into the White House presided over the 1916 presidential election, one that the country knew would decisively conclude America's neutrality in the war, or its decision to send forces to engage in European combat for the first time in history. The bankers left nothing to chance. Wilson, who would predictably follow House's lead on all matters, including war, was still their preferred candidate. But his competitor, Charles Evan Hughes, was no less of a Wall Street man. Hughes's roots were as a Wall Street lawyer. His firm represented the New York, Westchester, and Boston Railroad Company for J.P. Morgan and Company, and the Baptist Bible class that he led boasted many wealthy and influential members, including John D. Rockefeller Jr. The affable Hughes was stiff competition for the wooden and charmless Wilson, but such was the importance of American neutrality that "he kept us out of war" actually became the central slogan of the campaign that saw Wilson return to the White House.
And then, of course, came the famous election of 1916. Wilson wasn't popular, but Wilson simply, he had no kind of public persona which warmed people. On the contrary, he was a cold fish. He had dubious links with several of those who were powerful in Wall Street. But his propaganda for re-election was, he kept us out of war. Here was a man, vote for Wilson, he kept us out of war. An inherent promise that he would continue to keep America out of war. And in fact, of course, within months, America was thrown into the war by its own government.
He kept us out of war. But just as in the British election of 1906, which saw the British public overwhelmingly voting for Henry Campbell Bannerman's Liberal Party and their platform of peace, only to get the Milnerites in the cabinet entering secret agreements to bring about war, so too was the American public duped at the ballot box in 1916. In fact, in the fall of 1915, over 1 year before the election even took place, Wilson's string puller, Edward Mandell House, was engaged in a secret negotiation with Edward Grey, the Milnerite heading Britain's Foreign Office. That negotiation, long hidden from the public, but finally revealed when House's papers were published in 1928, shows the lengths to which Grey and House were willing to go to draw America into the war on the side of the Allies and against the Germans. On October 17, 1915, House drafted a letter to Grey which he called one of the most important letters I ever wrote. Before sending it, he split it into 2 separate coded messages to ensure it would not be readable if it were intercepted. In it, he laid out a plan to steer the US into war with Germany under the false pretense of a peace conference.
Dear Sir Edward, in my opinion, it would be a worldwide calamity if the war should continue to a point where the Allies could not, with the aid of the United States, bring about a peace along the lines you and I have so often discussed. It is in my mind that, after conferring with your government, I should proceed to Berlin and tell them that it was the President's purpose to intervene and stop this destructive war, provided the weight of the United States thrown on the side that accepted our proposal could do it. I would not let Berlin know, of course, of any understanding had with the Allies, but would rather lead them to think our proposal would be rejected by the Allies. This might induce Berlin to accept the proposal, but if they do not do so, it would nevertheless be the purpose to intervene.
Perhaps realizing the gravity of what was being proposed, Woodrow Wilson, the man who would later be elected for his ability to keep America out of war, merely added the word probably to House's assurance that America would join the war. The negotiations for this plan continued throughout the fall of 1915 and winter of 1916. In the end, the British government balked at the proposal because the thought that the Germans might actually accept peace, even a peace of disarmament brokered by the US, was not enough. They wanted to crush Germany completely, and nothing less than total defeat would be sufficient. Another pretense would have to be manufactured to embroil the US in the war. When, on the morning of May 7, 1915, House assured Grey and King George that the sinking of the Lusitania would cause a flame of indignation to sweep across America, he was correct. When he said it would probably carry us into war, he was mistaken. But in the end, it was the naval issue that eventually became the pretext for America's entry into war. The history books of the period, following the familiar pattern of downplaying Allied provocations and focusing only on the German reactions, highlight the German policy of unrestricted submarine warfare which led to the downing of the Lusitania. The practice, which called for German U-boats to attack merchant ships on sight, was in contravention of the international rules of the sea at the time and was widely abhorred as barbaric. But the policy was not instituted out of any insane bloodlust on the part of the Kaiser. It was in response to Britain's own policy of breaking international rules of the sea. At the outbreak of war in 1914, the British had used their position of naval superiority to begin a blockade of Germany. That campaign, described as one of the largest and most complex undertakings attempted by either side during the First World War, involved the declaration of the whole of the North Sea as a war zone. As a so-called distant blockade, involving the indiscriminate mining of an entire region of the high seas, the practice was in direct violation of the Declaration of Paris of 1856. The indiscriminate nature of the blockade, declaring the most basic of supplies like cotton and even food itself to be contraband, was a violation of the Declaration of London of 1909. More to the point, as an attempt to starve an entire country into submission, it was a crime against humanity. Eventually reduced to a starvation diet of 1,000 calories per day, tuberculosis, rickets, edema, and other maladies began to prey at those Germans who did not succumb to hunger. By the end of the war, the National Health Office in Berlin calculated that 763,000 people had died as a direct result of the blockade. Perversely, the blockade did not end with the war. In fact, with Germany's Baltic coast now effectively added to the blockade, the starvation actually continued and even intensified into 1919. Faced with protestations from the Austrian ambassador about the illegality of the British blockade, Colonel House, now America's de facto president, merely observed, "He forgets to add that England is not exercising her power in an objectionable way, for it is controlled by a democracy." This double standard was not the exception, but the rule when it came to those in America's East Coast establishment who were hungry to see the U.S. join the Allies on the battlefields of Europe. As historian and author Ralph Raico explained in a 1983 lecture, it was these double standards that led directly to America's entry into the war.
The Wilson administration now takes a position which will ultimately lead to war. The German government is to be held strictly accountable for the death of any Americans on the high seas, regardless of circumstances. The Germans say, well, let's see if we can live with this, as long as you're willing to put pressure on the British to have them modify their violations of international law. That is, they're placing a food on the list of contraband materials, which had never been done before. The British, as you know, take your merchant ships off the high seas on the way to Rotterdam, because they say anything that goes to Rotterdam is going to go to Germany. So they take American ships off the high seas. The British have put cotton on the list of contraband, confiscating these materials. They interfere with letters going to the continent because they think there's military intelligence possibly involved. The British are imposing in many ways on Americans. So if you hold them responsible, we'll behave ourselves as far as submarines go. This was not to be the case. and the attitude of the Americans towards British violations of neutral rights were quite different. One reason is that the American ambassador to London, Walter Hines Page, was an extreme Anglophile. One time, for instance, he gets a message from the State Department saying, tell the British they have to stop interfering with American mail shipments to neutral ports. And the American ambassador goes to the British Foreign Minister, Edward Grey, and says, look at the message I've just got from Washington. Let's get together and try to answer this. This was his attitude. The British were never held to the same standard as the Germans. At home, Theodore Roosevelt, who in previous years had been a great friend of the Kaisers and a great admirer of Germany, now says we have to get into this war right away. Besides that, there's a campaign for preparedness, for building up the American Army, the American Navy, drilling American citizens in combat techniques. There's a kind of hysteria, really, that travels over the country, considering that there's, at this time, certainly, no chance of some kind of immediate threat to the United States. And people like Roosevelt and Wilson begin talking in a very unfortunate way. Wilson says, for instance, in America we have too many hyphenated Americans. Of course, he meant German Americans, Irish Americans. And these people are not totally loyal to our country. Already scapegoats are being looked for, and public opinion is being roused. In January, this diplomatic negotiation, the exchange of memos goes on for the next few years. In January of 1917, the Americans, not having been able to budge the British in the least on any British violation of American rights, the British blockade intensifying, the Germans really feeling hunger. In a very literal sense, especially the people on the home front. The Kaiser is persuaded by his admirals and generals to begin unrestricted submarine warfare around the British Isles. The American position by this time had solidified, had become a totally rigid one, and when all is said and done, when you go through all of the back and forth memoranda and notes and principles established, the United States went to war against Germany in 1917 for the right of Americans to travel in armed, belligerent merchant ships carrying munitions through war zones. Wilson's position was that even in that case, the Germans simply had no right to attack the ship, as long as there are Americans on the ship. Shall I repeat that? Armed, belligerent, that is to say English, armed English merchant ships carrying munitions could not be fired upon by the Germans as long as there were American citizens on board. And it was for the right of Americans to go into the war zone on such vessels that we finally went to war.
After months of deliberations, and with the situation on the home front becoming increasingly desperate, the German military commanders decided to resume their unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917. As expected, U.S. merchant ships were sunk, including 4 ships in late March alone. On April 2, 1917, Woodrow Wilson made his historic speech calling for Congress to declare war on Germany and commit U.S. troops to European battlefields for the first time. The speech, made over 100 years ago by and for a world that has long since passed away, still resonates with us today. Embedded within it is the rhetoric of warfare that has been employed by president after president, prime minister after prime minister, in country after country, and war after war, right down to the current day. From it comes many of the phrases that we still recognize today as the language of lofty ideals and noble causes that always accompany the most bloody and ignoble wars.
With a profound sense of the solemn and even tragical character of the step I am taking, and of the grave responsibilities which it involves, but in unhesitating obedience to what I deem my constitutional duty, I advise that the Congress declare the recent course of the Imperial German government to be, in fact, nothing less than war, against the government and people of the United States. The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundations of political liberty. We have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We seek no indemnities for ourselves, no material compensation for the sacrifices we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind. We shall be satisfied when those rights have been made as secure as the faith and the freedom of nations can make them.
4 days later, on April 6, 1917, the U.S. Congress issued a formal declaration of war against the Imperial German government.
Inside the White House, President Woodrow Wilson conferred with advisors, then signed the proclamation of war against Germany. Everywhere there was cheering and waving of flags. Hindsight or cynicism might make us smile at the thought that this war was sometimes called the Great Adventure. Never again would we see our entry into a major conflict excite so many to such heights of elation. Naive? Probably. But here was a generation of young men not yet saturated by the paralyzing variety of self-analysis and the mock sciences. They believed.
Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere, so prepare, say a
All along the Western Front, the Allies rejoiced. The Yanks were coming. House, the Milner Group, the Pilgrims, the Wall Street financiers, and all of those who had worked so diligently for so many years to bring Uncle Sam into war had got their wish. And before the war was over, millions more casualties would pile up. Carnage the likes of which the world had never seen before had been fully unleashed. The trenches and the shelling, the no man's land and the rivers of blood, the starvation and the destruction, the carving up of empires, and the eradication of an entire generation of young men. Why? What was it all for? What did it accomplish? What was the point? To this day, over 100 years later, we still look back on the horrors of that great war with confusion. For so long we have been told non-answers about incompetent generals and ignorant politicians. It's the senselessness of war the teachers of this fraudulent and partial history have told us with a shrug. But, now that the players who worked to set the stage for this carnage have been unmasked, these questions can finally be answered.
Guys enjoyed that as much as I do. I love watching these documentaries. I love being involved, and I love watching them with friends and family and texting back and forth. Love the comments below. Thank you so much. Crush the share, crush the follow, and all the hearts. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, it's because of great patriots like you that jump over to SmythTV, become a patron, that we can continue to do this show every single night, Monday through Friday. And I'm cutting out of town. I'm gonna go celebrate my birthday with friends and family, going out camping this weekend. Enjoy the weather. Enjoy the tax breaks. People are traveling more now in the summer because it's the summertime, but everybody's got disposable income. They've got a little extra. They got a little more. As we talked about at the beginning of the show, the stock market true to roof. S&P up. Records up. 5 million new jobs, up. Things are just getting better under this administration. Think back, folks. Are you better off now than you were 4 years before? Got to remember that. 4 years before, we were being had the thumb on our back. The conspirators were going against the people of America, and now we can expose them every single night. Oh, goodness gracious, guys, for Freedom Friday, summer solstice, June 21st, my favorite day. Have a good weekend.
You've been listening to New Right Network, mobilizing, countering, energizing. Online at newrightnetwork.com.